The wind was blowing strong that October afternoon in Portland, Maine. Orange leaves danced around my feet as I walked toward the restaurant where Thomas had scheduled our lunch. My son rarely invited me to gatherings like this, so I had dressed with care, my favorite navy blue dress and the pearl necklace that my late husband Robert had given me on our 30th wedding anniversary. Before continuing with the story, please click the like button, subscribe to the channel, and comment where you're watching from. Your help is very important. At 67, Margaret Ellis, still made a point of maintaining an impeccable appearance. My gray hair was perfectly styled, and although the wrinkles around my eyes deepened each year, I considered them marks of a life lived intensely through joys and sorrows. I entered Portside Bistro precisely at noon, scanning the tables for Thomas. I spotted him in the far corner, already seated with a glass of water, checking his phone. My heart fluttered with that familiar mix of love and apprehension that had characterized our relationship for the past decade. Since Robert died, things had never been the same between us. "Hello, Thomas," I said, approaching the table with a smile. He looked up, his expression difficult to read. "Mom, thanks for coming." He stood briefly, offering the most perfunctory of hugs before we both sat down. Thomas had always been handsome, taking after his father with those striking blue eyes and strong jawline. At 42, he was a successful architect with his own firm in Portland. His hair was beginning to gray at the temples, just as Robert's had at the same age. "How are Lauren and Ethan?" I asked, referring to my daughter-in-law and 15-year-old grandson. "They're fine," Thomas replied, his tone clipped. He flagged down a waiter. "Can I get a bourbon neat?" "Mom, would you like something?" "Just iced tea, please," I said to the waiter, who nodded and left. An uncomfortable silence settled between us. I tried again. "I saw Ethan's baseball team made the regional finals. I was thinking of attending the game next weekend." Thomas's jaw tightened. "About that, Mom, that's partly why I wanted to talk to you today." The waiter returned with our drinks, and Thomas took a long sip of his bourbon before continuing. "Lauren and I have been discussing things. We feel that, well, we think it might be better if you step back a little." "Step back?" I repeated, the words hanging in the air between us. "From our lives, Mom, from Ethan's life." Thomas wouldn't meet my eyes. "It's just that Lauren feels you're a bit too involved. And honestly, I agree with her." I sat perfectly still, my iced tea untouched. "I see him once a month, Thomas. Sometimes less. It's not just the frequency, it's the intensity, the way you try to connect with him about family history, about Dad, about the Ellis legacy. Lauren feels you're putting pressure on him." I felt a familiar tightness in my chest. Lauren had never approved of me. From the day Thomas brought her home 15 years ago, there had been a tension between us that never dissipated. Robert had been the buffer, the peacemaker. Without him, that gulf had only widened. "I didn't realize sharing family stories was considered pressure," I said carefully, trying to keep my voice steady. "Ethan asks me questions. I answer them." Thomas sighed, the sound laced with impatience. "Mom, Lauren and I are trying to raise Ethan with our values, our traditions. We're building our own family culture, and the Ellis history isn't part of that culture." I asked, feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the restaurant's air conditioning. Thomas took another drink. "Look, I'll be direct. Lauren's parents are much more involved in our lives. They align better with how we want to raise Ethan. They don't constantly bring up the past or talk about what Grandpa Ellis would have wanted." "I see." My voice was barely above a whisper. "It's not personal, Mom." But everything about his tone suggested otherwise. "Then what is it, Thomas?" He looked at me directly for the first time since I'd arrived. "We're forging our own path. I have a new family now, Mom. Lauren, Ethan, the Bradleys. They're my priority." "The Bradleys?" Lauren's parents, who lived just 3 blocks from Thomas and his family, who had Sunday dinner with him every week, who were invited to every school event, every celebration, and I'm not part of that family. The words escaped before I could stop them. Thomas's expression hardened. "You're my mother. That's not going to change. But in terms of our day-to-day lives, in terms of influence on Ethan, you're not part of my life that way anymore. I need you to respect that." The restaurant suddenly felt too loud, too crowded. Conversations and laughter from nearby tables crashed over me in waves as I tried to process what my son was saying. I see. I managed. And does Ethan feel this way, too? Thomas looked uncomfortable. Ethan is 15. He doesn't get to make these decisions. Lauren and I do. I nodded slowly, gathering my composure. 42 years. 42 years of loving this man. From the moment the doctor placed him in my arms, 42 years of bandaging scraped knees, attending every baseball game, helping with science projects, supporting him through college, celebrating his successes, and comforting him through failures. Well then, I said, reaching for my purse. I think we've covered everything. Mom, don't be dramatic. We're just asking for some space. Space. I repeated, from your mother who sees you and your family once a month at most. It's not about frequency. It's about influence. I finished for him. Yes, you made that quite clear. I stood up, smoothing my dress. Please give my love to Ethan. Tell him his grandmother thinks of him every day. Mom, sit down. You haven't even ordered lunch. I've lost my appetite, Thomas. I placed a $20 bill on the table for my untouched tea. Thank you for your honesty. I walked out of the restaurant with my head held high, though inside, I was crumbling. I made it to my car before the tears came. Hot and furious, I gripped the steering wheel, letting the waves of pain wash over me. You're not part of my life, he had essentially said. My own son, the boy I had carried inside me, had raised, had loved unconditionally. I drove home in a daze, barely registering the familiar streets of Portland, the city where Robert and I had raised our family and built our life together. Our beautiful Victorian home on Eastern Promenade felt emptier than ever as I walked through the door. I moved through the rooms like a ghost, touching photographs, mementos of a family that apparently no longer existed. There was Thomas graduating from high school, Robert's arm around his shoulders, both beaming with pride. There was baby Ethan in my arms, his tiny hand wrapped around my finger. There we all were at Robert's 65th birthday, just months before the cancer diagnosis that would take him from us 2 years later. I found myself in Robert's study, the room I'd kept exactly as he left it. The large mahogany desk dominated the space, papers still arranged in neat piles, his reading glasses perched on top, as if he'd just stepped out for a moment. I sank into his leather chair, the familiar scent of him, leather, books, and the faintest trace of pipe tobacco still lingering after 5 years. What would you do, Robert? I whispered to the empty room. How would you handle this? I could almost hear his response. Robert had always been the practical one, the problem solver. He wouldn't waste time on tears. He'd develop a plan. I opened the bottom drawer of his desk where we kept important family documents. Our wills were there along with property deeds, insurance policies, and financial records. The Ellis family legacy, carefully documented and preserved. Robert had been meticulous about these things, insisting that everything be in order, that our family's future be secure. The Ellis family. I paused, reflecting on that name. I'd been born Margaret Winslow, the daughter of a respected history professor at Bowdoin College and a librarian mother. I'd proudly taken Robert's surname when we married, as was the custom in 1979. I'd become Margaret Ellis, wife of Robert, mother of Thomas, grandmother of Ethan. But if I wasn't part of Thomas's life anymore, what did that make me? I pulled out our wills, reading through the familiar language. Robert had left everything to me with provisions for Thomas and Ethan after my passing. The family home, the vacation property in Bar Harbor, the investments, the Ellis family heirlooms, all would eventually pass to Thomas and then to Ethan. That had always been the plan. The Ellis legacy continuing through the generations. But now Thomas had made it clear I wasn't part of his family anymore. He was forging his own path with Lauren and the Bradleys. I stared at the documents, a seed of an idea taking root. If I wasn't part of Thomas's family, then perhaps the Ellis legacy wasn't meant for him after all. The thought was shocking, even to me. It went against everything Robert and I had planned. But then, we'd never planned for our only son to essentially disown his mother. I reached for the phone and dialed a number I knew by heart. Blackwell and Associates. How may I direct your call? Patricia Blackwell. Please tell her it's Margaret Ellis. Patricia had been my friend since college and had served as our family attorney for decades. If anyone could help me navigate this situation, it was her. Margaret. What a lovely surprise. Patricia's warm voice came through the line moments later. Patricia, I need to speak with you. It's important. Can I come to your office tomorrow? Of course. Is everything all right? You sound upset. I took a deep breath. No, everything is not all right, but I'm hoping you can help me change that. After hanging up, I moved to the window, looking out at the Atlantic Ocean visible from our hillside home. Robert and I had purchased this house when Thomas was just a baby, envisioning generations of Ellis children running through its halls. We'd chosen Portland because of its history, its character, its sense of permanence. Now I wondered what would remain of the life we'd built together. If Thomas didn't want me in his life, did he deserve the legacy Robert and I had created? The sun was setting over the water, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. Robert and I used to sit on the porch and watch these sunsets together, planning our future, dreaming of grandchildren and great-grandchildren. What would he say now? Would he tell me to forgive Thomas? To accept my diminished role in my grandson's life? Or would he understand my pain, my sense of betrayal? I didn't know. But I did know that tomorrow, when I met with Patricia, I would begin to reclaim something I'd surrendered long ago, my identity apart from the Ellis name. If Thomas wanted to forge his own path, separate from me, then perhaps it was time I did the same. I wiped away the last of my tears and straightened my shoulders. I was still Margaret Ellis for now, but perhaps not for much longer, and tomorrow would be the first day of whatever came next. I barely slept that night. The conversation with Thomas kept replaying in my mind, each word cutting deeper with every recollection. By the time morning came, my resolve had hardened. I dressed with particular care, in a charcoal gray pants suit that Robert always said made me look formidable. Today, I needed to feel strong. Patricia's law office occupied the top floor of a renovated brick building in Portland's Old Port district. As I walked through the door, the familiar scent of leather-bound books and fresh coffee greeted me. We'd signed our wills here, established trusts for Thomas and Ethan here, settled Robert's estate here. This place held the legal framework of our family's history. Margaret, Patricia said, coming around her desk to embrace me. At 69, she was still practicing law with the same sharp mind and direct approach that had made her one of Portland's most respected attorneys. Her silver hair was cut in a stylish bob, and her eyes behind fashionable frames were kind but shrewd. "You look terrible," she said bluntly, gesturing for me to sit. I managed a small smile. Always the diplomat, Patricia. We've known each other too long for diplomacy. She poured me a cup of coffee. Tell me what's happened. I recounted my lunch with Thomas, trying to keep my voice steady as I repeated his words. Patricia listened without interruption, her expression growing increasingly concerned. "You're not part of my life," I concluded. "That's essentially what my son told me." Patricia removed her glasses, pinching the bridge of her nose. "I'm so sorry, Margaret. Truly, I don't want sympathy," I said more sharply than I intended. "I want action." "What kind of action did you have in mind?" I set my coffee cup down carefully. "I want to change my will. All of it. I don't want Thomas to inherit anything. Not the house, not the Bar Harbor property, not a single penny of the investments. And I want to reclaim my maiden name." Patricia studied me for a long moment. "That's significant. Margaret, are you sure this isn't a reaction you might regret later?" "Family disputes can be. This isn't a dispute," I interrupted. "This is my son informing me that I'm no longer part of his family, that I have no place in his or my grandson's life. And changing your name, going back to Winslow, after nearly 45 years as Margaret Ellis?" I hadn't spoken my maiden name aloud in decades, but hearing it now felt right. Yes, Margaret Winslow. That's who I was before. Perhaps that's who I need to be again. Patricia nodded slowly. "Legally, it's all quite straightforward. The will changes, the name change. Those are simple procedures. But emotionally, I've spent the last 5 years emotionally adrift. Patricia, since Robert died, I've tried to maintain my connection to Thomas and Ethan. I've respected boundaries, limited my visits, never criticized Lauren, even when I stopped, not wanting to dwell on past grievances. The point is, I've done everything right, and it still wasn't enough. Now I need to focus on protecting myself. And what about Ethan? Do you want to cut him out as well? The question hit me like a physical blow. No, I said quietly. Ethan is 15. He's not making these decisions. So you'd still want him to inherit eventually? I thought about my grandson, a quiet, thoughtful boy who had Robert's eyes and, I like to think, my curiosity. Yes, but not through Thomas. Is there a way to set something up directly for Ethan when he's older? Patricia nodded. We can establish a trust that bypasses Thomas entirely. Ethan could access it at 25 perhaps, or 30, whatever age you think appropriate. 25, I said, remembering how Thomas had matured around that age. And I want to ensure he knows it came from me, from his grandmother who loved him, even when she wasn't welcome in his home. Patricia made notes. We can arrange that now. About the properties and other assets. I took a deep breath. I've been thinking about the house. It's too big for just me, and every room holds memories that are becoming more painful than comforting. You want to sell it? Maybe. Or maybe something else. An idea had been forming since last night. The Winslow family, my family, has a long history in Maine. My father dedicated his life to preserving and teaching that history. What if I donated the house to the Portland Historical Society? It could become a museum or research center. Patricia looked surprised. That's not what I expected, though the house would certainly qualify as historically significant. It's one of the finest examples of Victorian architecture on the Eastern Promenade. Robert would approve, I think. He always said the house deserved to be shared, to be appreciated. I felt a small measure of peace at the thought. The Bar Harbor property, too. Perhaps it could become a retreat for historians or writers. You're talking about creating a legacy completely separate from the Ellis name, Patricia observed. Yes, I said, the idea crystallizing as I spoke. The Winslow legacy, something of my own, something Thomas can't claim or control. Patricia set down her pen. Margaret, I've known you for 50 years. I've never seen this side of you. Neither have I admitted. But then, I've never been told by my only child that I'm not part of his life anymore. She nodded, understanding in her eyes. I'll draw up the paperwork, the name change, the new will, the trusts for Ethan, the foundation for the properties. It will take some time to arrange everything properly. I have time, I said. That's one thing. Being cast aside by your family gives you plenty of time. After leaving Patricia's office, I didn't go straight home. Instead, I drove to the Eastern Promenade, parking where I could see both my house on the hill and the expansive view of Casco Bay. Robert and I had walked along this promenade countless times, discussing everything from household finances to philosophical questions about life and legacy. What makes a family, Robert? I asked aloud, imagining him walking beside me. Is it just blood and name, or is it something more? In the distance, a ferry made its way toward one of the Calendar Islands. Robert and I had taken Ethan on that ferry when he was just 7, his face alight with excitement as we spotted seals lounging on the rocky shores of Peaks Island. Thomas and Lauren had been busy that day, too busy to join us. Perhaps that should have been a warning sign. My phone buzzed with a text message. I expected it to be Patricia, with some follow-up question, but instead, it was from a number I didn't immediately recognize. Grandma, it's Ethan. Dad told me what happened. Can we talk? My heart raced. Ethan had his own phone now, of course, but he'd never texted me directly before. Our communications had always been filtered through Thomas or Lauren. I quickly saved his number and replied, of course. When? The response came almost immediately. Tomorrow after school. The coffee shop near my school, 3:30. I'll be there, I typed back, then added, I love you, Ethan. There was a longer pause before his reply appeared. Love you too. 3 simple words, but they brought tears to my eyes. Whatever happened with Thomas, I hadn't lost Ethan. Not yet, anyway. That night, I began the painful process of sorting through the house, looking at each item with new eyes. What would stay with me? What would become part of the Winslow Legacy Collection? What should go to Ethan directly? In our bedroom, my bedroom now, I opened the jewelry box that held pieces from both the Ellis and Winslow families. The pearl necklace Robert had given me, diamond earrings that had belonged to his mother, a sapphire ring that had been my grandmother's. I lifted out a pocket watch that had belonged to my great-grandfather, Charles Winslow. The gold case was engraved with his initials, and inside was a faded photograph of his wife, Elizabeth. They had lived in this very city during the late 1800s, raising 6 children in a house not unlike this one. Charles Winslow had been a shipbuilder, creating vessels that sailed to ports around the world. His name had meant something in Portland. The Winslow name had history, had weight, and now I would reclaim it. The next afternoon, I arrived at Coastal Coffee 15 minutes early, securing a quiet table in the corner. The shop was popular with high school students, and several groups were already there, filling the space with energetic chatter. I spotted Ethan the moment he walked in. At 15, he was already nearly 6 feet tall, with the lanky build of an athlete. His dark hair, just like Thomas's at that age, flopped over his forehead, and he pushed it back in a gesture so reminiscent of Robert that my heart clenched. He saw me and hesitated briefly before making his way over. I resisted the urge to stand and hug him, unsure of what boundaries existed now. "Hi, Grandma," he said, sliding into the chair across from me. "Hello, Ethan. It's so good to see you." I pushed forward a mug. "I ordered you hot chocolate with extra whipped cream. Still your favorite." He smiled. A small, cautious smile, but genuine. "Yeah, thanks." We sat in awkward silence for a moment. I wanted to ask so many questions. Does your father know you're here? What did he tell you about our lunch? Are you here because you want to be, or because you feel obligated? Instead, I said, "How's baseball going? I hear you made the regional finals." Ethan nodded, wrapping his hands around the mug. "Yeah, we play this weekend. I'm starting pitcher." "That's wonderful. Your grandfather would have been so proud." At the mention of Robert, Ethan's expression softened. "I was thinking about him the other day, about how he used to help me practice. Remember how he built that pitching target in the backyard?"
Ida.
He spent an entire weekend on it, getting the measurements just right. "Dad took it down last summer," Ethan said quietly. "He said we needed the space for Lauren's garden." I kept my expression neutral, though the news stung. Robert had indeed built that target with meticulous care, wanting it to be perfect for his only grandson. "Grandma," Ethan began, then stopped, fidgeting with his napkin. "Dad said you, and he had a disagreement that you might not be coming around as much anymore." So that's how Thomas had framed it, a disagreement. Did he explain what the disagreement was about? I asked carefully. Ethan shook his head. "Just that you and Lauren have different ideas about family stuff, and that he needs to support Lauren because she's his wife." I took a sip of my tea, considering my response. I wouldn't put Ethan in the middle. I wouldn't make him choose sides or feel guilty. "Your father and I see some things differently," I said finally. "But Ethan, my feelings for you haven't changed. You're my grandson, and I love you very much." "But will I still see you?" he asked. And for a moment, he looked younger than his 15 years, more like the little boy who used to climb into my lap for stories. "I hope so," I said honestly. "That might be complicated right now, but I'm not going anywhere. I'll always be here for you." He nodded, seeming relieved. "Good, because I've been working on this history project for school, and I need your help." "A history project?"
Yeah.
"It's about family histories and how they connect to local history. We're supposed to trace our family back at least 3 generations and show how they were part of the community." I couldn't help but smile. History had always been my passion, a trait I'd inherited from my father. I'd be happy to help. "What would you like to know?" "Well, I was thinking about using the Ellis side because of Grandpa's business and stuff, but then I remembered you saying your dad was some big professor, and your family has been in Portland even longer." "That's right. The Winslows have been in Maine since the 1850s. Ethan's eyes lit up. Really? That's perfect for my project. Did they do anything important? For the next hour, I told Ethan about the Winslow family, about my great-grandfather, the shipbuilder, my grandfather, the state legislator, my father, the history professor. I told him about the Winslow women, too. My great-grandmother who'd run a boarding house, my grandmother who'd been one of the first female physicians in the state, my mother who'd helped establish Portland's first public library. Ethan took notes, asking thoughtful questions that reminded me of my own curiosity at his age. When I showed him the pocket watch I'd brought, Charles Winslow's watch, he handled it with reverence.
This is so cool, Grandma.
Can I take a picture of it for my project? Of course. I hesitated, then continued. I'd like you to have it. His eyes widened. Really? But isn't it super valuable? It is valuable, but not primarily in terms of money. It's valuable because it connects us to our history, to the people who came before us. I closed his fingers around the watch. The Winslow history is your history too, Ethan. Don't ever forget that. Thanks, Grandma. He carefully tucked the watch into his backpack. I should probably get going. Dad's picking me up at the library in 20 minutes. Of course, I stood. And this time I did hug him, relieved when he hugged me back without hesitation. Ethan, I said as he turned to leave. If you need anything at all, you can always call me or text. Anytime, he nodded. I know, Grandma. Then, with a small smile, maybe you could still come to my game this weekend. It starts at 1, say. Hope loomed in my chest. I'd love to. After he left, I sat back down. My tea was long cold, but my heart was warmer than it had been in days. Thomas might have decided I wasn't part of his life anymore, but Ethan still wanted me in his, and that was something worth fighting for. My phone buzzed with a text from Patricia. Papers ready for your review tomorrow, 10 a.m. I texted back a quick confirmation. Tomorrow, I would begin the process of legally becoming Margaret Winslow again. I would start creating the Winslow legacy that would eventually benefit Ethan and generations beyond him. Thomas had the Ellis name.
He could keep it.
But everything else, the history, the properties, the true legacy, would follow a different path, my path. As I drove home, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not just anger or hurt, but a sense of possibility. For 45 years, I had been Margaret Ellis, defined largely by my roles as Robert's wife and Thomas's mother. Now, I had the chance to rediscover Margaret Winslow, to define myself on my own terms. It wasn't the future I had planned, but perhaps it was the future I needed. The baseball field buzzed with energy as I found a seat in the bleachers. Parents and supporters filled the stands, many wearing the blue and gold colors of Portland East High School. I had deliberately arrived just before the first pitch, hoping to avoid any awkward encounters with Thomas or Lauren. From my vantage point, I could see Ethan warming up on the mound, his lanky frame somehow looking more mature in his uniform. Pride swelled in my chest as I watched him throw practice pitches with perfect form, Robert's careful coaching evident in every movement. I was so focused on Ethan that I didn't notice someone climbing the bleachers toward me until a voice said, "Margaret, is that seat taken?" I looked up to see Helen Bradley, Lauren's mother. My first instinct was to make an excuse, to move, to avoid what would surely be an uncomfortable conversation. But something made me stay put. "It's free," I said, gesturing to the space beside me. Helen settled in, arranging her team's scarf around her neck. At 63, she was a few years younger than me, with carefully maintained blonde hair and the same pointed features as her daughter. "I'm surprised to see you here," she said, her tone neutral, but her meaning clear. "Ethan invited me," I replied simply. I wouldn't apologize for attending my grandson's game. Not to Helen or anyone else. She nodded, turning her attention to the field as the game began. We sat in silence as Ethan struck out the first batter, both of us applauding his accomplishment. It was surreal, sitting beside the woman whose family had effectively replaced me in my son's life, both of us cheering for the same child. After the third out, Helen spoke again. "Lauren mentioned you, and Thomas had a disagreement. Is that what they're calling it?" The words came out sharper than I intended. Helen sighed. Look, Margaret, I'm not here to argue. Family situations are complicated. I almost laughed at the understatement. Yes, they certainly are. For what it's worth, Helen continued, her eyes still on the game. Bill and I didn't ask to be put in the middle of this. We just want what's best for Ethan. As do I said. I've only ever wanted what's best for Ethan and for Thomas. Helen turned to look at me then. I know, but sometimes what we think is best and what actually is best aren't the same thing. I felt a flash of indignation. Who was she to lecture me about what was best for my family? But before I could respond, a crack of the bat drew our attention. Ethan had connected with a fastball, sending it deep into left field. The crowd rose to its feet as he rounded the bases, sliding home just ahead of the throw. Yes, Helen and I exclaimed simultaneously, then exchanged awkward glances at our shared enthusiasm. As the innings progressed, our conversation remained sporadic but civil. We discussed safe topics, the unseasonably warm weather, the quality of the opposing team, the college prospects of some of the senior players. Neither of us mentioned Thomas or Lauren directly, dancing around the elephant in the bleachers. It wasn't until the seventh inning, with Portland East leading 3-1, that Helen broached the subject again. Ethan's been working on some family history project, she said casually. He was asking Bill all sorts of questions about the Bradley ancestors last week. Yes, he mentioned it when we met for hot chocolate, I replied. It sounds like an interesting assignment. Helen's eyebrows rose slightly. You've seen him recently? Just once for about an hour. We discussed the Winslow side of his heritage. I felt no need to explain or defend the meeting. The Winslow side? Helen seemed confused. My maiden name, I explained, before I married Robert. Oh, I always thought you were born in Ellis. No, I was Margaret Winslow for 23 years before I became Margaret Ellis. I paused, then added, and soon I'll be Margaret Winslow again. Helen turned to face me fully. You're changing your name back? I nodded. Among other changes, yes. She studied me for a long moment. This is about more than just a disagreement with Thomas, isn't it? It's about reclaiming who I am. I said, if I'm not part of Thomas's life anymore, his words, not mine, then perhaps it's time I build a life that isn't defined by the Ellis name. Helen looked uncomfortable. Margaret, I don't think Thomas meant. He was quite clear, I interrupted. And it's all right. People grow apart, even mothers and sons, apparently. On the field, Ethan struck out another batter, ending the inning. As he walked back to the dugout, he scanned the crowd, his face breaking into a smile when he spotted me. He raised his glove in a small wave, which I returned. Then his gaze shifted slightly, and he waved to someone in another section of the bleachers. I followed his line of sight and saw Thomas and Lauren seated on the opposite side of the field. Thomas was watching me, his expression unreadable even from a distance. When he realized I'd spotted him, he quickly looked away. They didn't know you'd be here, Helen said almost apologetically. Ethan invited me, I repeated. I wouldn't miss it. The game ended with a 4-2 victory for Portland East. As people began to disperse, Helen stood, adjusting her scarf. It was nice to see you, Margaret. You too, Helen, I replied, surprised to find I meant it. Despite everything, there was something comforting about connecting with someone who also cared about Ethan. Will you be attending the celebratory dinner? She asked. The team families are gathering at Dillo's. I shook my head. I don't think that would be comfortable for anyone. Please give Ethan my congratulations. Tell him his grandfather would have been very proud of that curveball in the fourth inning. Helen nodded and made her way down the bleachers. I remained seated, waiting for the crowds to thin before making my exit. I didn't want to force an encounter with Thomas and Lauren. Not here, not now. As I finally stood to leave, I heard Ethan calling my name. He was jogging toward me, still in his uniform, his face flushed with excitement from the wind. Grandma, you came? Of course I did. You were magnificent, Ethan. He beamed. Did you see that home run? And Coach said my fastball was hitting 82 miles per hour. I saw everything. You have a real gift. I reached out to squeeze his arm, conscious of not embarrassing him with too much physical affection in front of any lingering teammates. "Are you coming to Dillo's?" he asked, his expression hopeful. "Oh, I don't think so, sweetheart. It's a team celebration," and he interrupted. "You should be there." The simple declaration, "your family," made my throat tighten with emotion. "That's very sweet of you, but I think it's better if I sit this one out. We can celebrate another time. Just you and me." Disappointment flashed across his face, but he nodded. "Okay, maybe next weekend we could get ice cream or something. I'd like that very much." I smiled. "You'd better go. Your parents are waiting." Ethan glanced over his shoulder to where Thomas and Lauren stood at a distance, watching our interaction. "Yeah, I should go. But Grandma?" "Yes, I'm using the Winslow family history for my project. Dad said I should focus on the Ellis side, but he shrugged. The Winslows are more interesting. Did you know your great-grandfather's shipping company built vessels that sailed all the way to China? That's so cool." My heart swelled. Yes, the Charles Winslow Shipping Company. There are logbooks from those voyages in the Portland Maritime Museum. Ethan's eyes lit up. "Really? Could we go see them sometime?" "Absolutely. Whenever you'd like." "Ethan?" Thomas's voice called from across the field, a note of impatience evident. "Got to go," Ethan said, giving me a quick, impulsive hug before jogging back to his parents. I watched the three of them walk to the parking lot together, Thomas's hand on Ethan's shoulder, Lauren talking animatedly, probably about the game. They looked like the perfect family portrait, and I was on the outside looking in, but Ethan had called me family, and he wanted to learn about the Winslows.
Perhaps that was enough for now.
The following week was a flurry of legal paperwork and meetings. Patricia had efficiently organized everything from a name change petition to the new will and trust documents to the preliminary discussions with the Portland Historical Society about the house donation. "They're ecstatic about the possibility," Patricia told me as we sat in her office reviewing the final documents. "Apparently, they've had their eye on your house for years as a potential period museum. The architecture, the location, the historical significance. It's perfect, and they understand my conditions. I asked that it would be called the Winslow House, and that a portion would be dedicated to displaying artifacts and information about the Winslow family's contributions to Portland's history. All agreed to. They're particularly excited about your father's academic papers and your great-grandfather's shipping records." "Oh, and they mentioned something about maritime artifacts." I nodded. "There's a collection of items Charles brought back from his voyages. Jade carvings from China, textiles from India, navigational instruments from England. They've been in storage since Robert and I downsized my parents' home after my mother died."
Perfect.
"They're drafting a formal acceptance letter with all the details." Patricia handed me a pen. "Now, if you're ready, these are the documents to petition for your name change." I took the pen, poised to sign where she indicated. "It feels strange," I admitted. "Almost like I'm divorcing the past." "Not divorcing," Patricia corrected gently. "Reclaiming. There's a difference." I signed the papers, watching as Margaret Winslow took shape beneath my pen. It was a signature I hadn't used in nearly 45 years, yet it felt natural, like greeting an old friend. "Now for the will and trusts," Patricia continued. "Everything is as we discussed. The house and historical items to the Portland Historical Society with provisions for the establishment of the Winslow Legacy Foundation. The Bar Harbor property converted to a retreat center for historians and writers. A trust for Ethan, accessible when he turns 25, with provisions for educational expenses before that, and a separate smaller trust for Thomas that consists solely of personal items that were specifically Robert's, his watches, his books, his golf clubs." I hesitated at that last item. "Are you sure about including Thomas at all?" after what he said. "I think it's the right thing to do," Patricia said. "Not for Thomas's sake necessarily, but for yours and for Robert's memory. These items were his father's. Excluding him completely might feel satisfying now, but in the long run—" "You're right," I sighed. "Robert would want him to have those things." I signed the remaining documents, feeling lighter with each signature. When I finished, Patricia gathered them all into a folder. "It will take a few weeks for the name change to become official. The trusts will be established immediately. As for the house donation, once the Historical Society's board approves, we can move forward with the transfer of ownership, and I can continue living there until you decide otherwise. They're happy to have you remain as long as you wish. They see it as a benefit, having someone who knows the house's history intimately. I nodded, relieved. I wasn't ready to leave my home yet, despite the painful memories it now held. Thank you, Patricia, for everything. That's what friends are for, she said, squeezing my hand. Now, how about lunch? We can celebrate the birth of the Winslow legacy. Over lunch at a small bistro overlooking the harbor, Patricia and I reminisced about our college days, about the young women we'd been, and the paths our lives had taken. We'd both married, had children, built careers. But while Patricia's 3 children and 7 grandchildren remained close, regularly gathering for Sunday dinners and holiday celebrations, my family had splintered. Do you think I'm doing the right thing? I asked her as we lingered over coffee. Creating this separate legacy, essentially cutting Thomas out. Patricia considered the question carefully. I think you're doing the only thing you can in the circumstances. Thomas made his choice. You're making yours. But what if it only widens the rift? What if it means I lose Ethan, too? From what you've told me, Ethan is interested in the Winslow history. He's reaching out to you independently. That's a good sign. He's 15, I reminded her. Still very much under his parents' influence. True, but 15-year-olds also start developing their own opinions, their own sense of right and wrong. Patricia smiled. My oldest grandson is 16, and believe me, he makes his views known, especially when he thinks his parents are being unreasonable. I hope you're right. I stirred my coffee absently. I just don't want Ethan caught in the middle. Then make sure he isn't. Be careful not to speak negatively about Thomas or Lauren. Focus on building your relationship with Ethan around shared interests, like this history project, for instance. That's good advice. I acknowledged the Winslow legacy should be about more than just my hurt feelings or sense of betrayal. It should be about preserving something valuable, something Ethan can be proud of. Exactly. Patricia checked her watch. I hate to cut this short, but I have a client coming at 2. As we parted outside the restaurant, Patricia hugged me tightly. You're going to be fine, Margaret Winslow. Better than fine. You're going to create something meaningful out of this pain. I hope so, I said. It's all I can do now. On my way home, I made a detour to the Portland Maritime Museum. I hadn't visited in years, not since I'd brought Ethan when he was 9 or 10. But now, with the Winslow legacy taking shape in my mind, I wanted to see what resources they had that might be relevant. The museum was housed in a former customs house, its brick exterior weathered by decades of salt air. Inside, displays chronicled Portland's rich maritime history, models of ships, artifacts from various eras, maps and charts and photographs. I approached the information desk where a young woman greeted me with a friendly smile. Welcome to the Portland Maritime Museum. How can I help you today? I'm interested in information about the Charles Winslow Shipping Company, I said. Particularly any logbooks or records you might have in your collection. Winslow Shipping, she brightened. Oh, we have quite a bit on that. Are you a researcher? In a way, I replied. Charles Winslow was my great-grandfather. Her eyes widened. Really? That's fascinating. We actually have a small exhibit about the company in our Portland Commerce section. And yes, several logbooks in our archives. Would it be possible to see them? I'm helping my grandson with a school project about family history. Of course. Let me call our archivist. She picked up the phone, had a brief conversation, then smiled at me again. Dr. Bennett will be right out. He's very knowledgeable about local maritime history. A few minutes later, a tall man with a salt and pepper beard approached. Ms. Winslow, I'm James Bennett, the museum's archivist. The name caught me off guard for a moment. I was still legally Margaret Ellis, but soon, very soon, I would indeed be Ms. Winslow again. It felt like a glimpse into my future. Thank you for seeing me, Dr. Bennett. I understand you have materials related to the Winslow Shipping Company. Indeed, we do. He gestured for me to follow him. Your great-grandfather's company was quite significant in Portland's commercial development during the late 19th century. We have logbooks from several of his vessels, correspondence with international partners, even some personal journals. As we walked toward the archives, I felt a growing sense of connection to this part of my heritage, a part one had somewhat neglected during my years as Margaret Ellis. The Winslow legacy had always been there, running like a thread through my life. But now I was consciously picking it up, examining it, preparing to pass it on. Not to Thomas, who had rejected me, but to Ethan, who still called me family, and perhaps, in a larger sense, to the community of Portland itself. Through the Winslow House Museum and the Maritime Records, I might contribute to this very institution. It wasn't the future I had planned, but standing there among the artifacts of my family's past, I could begin to envision a future with purpose, with meaning, a future where the name Winslow would once again be associated with something significant in Portland. Thomas had the Ellis name, but I would build something new, yet rooted in something very old with the Winslow name, and perhaps someday he would understand what he had rejected when he told me I wasn't part of his life anymore. 6 months can change everything. As spring blossomed in Portland, I stood in what had once been Robert's study, now transformed into the central exhibition room of the Winslow House Museum. The mahogany desk remained, but instead of Robert's papers, it displayed carefully arranged artifacts from the Winslow family history, my great-grandfather's navigational instruments, my grandmother's medical journals, my father's academic publications. Glass cases along the walls held other treasures. Charles Winslow's pocket watch, a replica since I'd given the original to Ethan, trade goods from the shipping company's voyages, and photographs spanning 5 generations of Winslows in Portland. Each item told a story, not just of my family, but of the city's growth and development. Ms. Winslow, the board members have arrived. I turned to see Sarah Chin, the young curator the Historical Society had hired to oversee the museum. In the 3 months since I'd officially donated the house, while retaining lifetime residence rights to the 3rd floor, now converted into a comfortable apartment, Sarah and I had worked closely together, cataloging items, planning exhibitions, and creating an educational program for local schools.
Thank you, Sarah.
I'll be right there. I took one last look around the room. Today was the private opening of the Winslow House Museum, with the public opening scheduled for the weekend. The board members of the Historical Society would be the first official visitors, followed by a small reception. In the main parlor, a dozen people mingled, admiring the restored Victorian details and the historical displays. Patricia was there along with several prominent community members who had supported the project. As I entered, the Society's president, Howard Len, approached with a warm smile. "Margaret, everything looks magnificent. The Society can't thank you enough for this extraordinary gift to Portland." "It's my pleasure, Howard. This house deserves to be shared, and the Winslow family history is fascinating. I had no idea your great-grandfather's shipping company had such extensive trade with East Asia. Neither did I until recently, I admitted. I've been rediscovering my own heritage along with everyone else." Howard nodded understandingly. He knew some of my story. The estrangement from Thomas, the reclaiming of my maiden name, now official for 3 months, and the creation of the Winslow Legacy Foundation. Portland was a small city in many ways. Such things didn't remain private for long. "Well, shall we begin the tour?" he suggested. For the next hour, Sarah and I guided the group through the house, explaining the historical significance of both the architecture and the Winslow family artifacts. The board members asked thoughtful questions and offered enthusiastic praise. By the time we gathered in the garden for refreshments, the project had clearly been deemed a success. As I accepted a glass of champagne from a circulating waiter, Patricia joined me by the fountain that had been Robert's pride and joy. "Congratulations, Margaret. You've created something remarkable here."
Thank you.
It's still surreal sometimes seeing my family history displayed like this, having strangers interested in the Winslows.
Not just interested, impressed.
Patricia gestured toward a cluster of board members deep in conversation. I overheard them discussing additional funding for the Maritime Trade Exhibition. They think it could become a significant educational resource. I smiled, feeling a quiet pride. When I first conceived of donating the house, it had been partly out of spite, a way to ensure Thomas wouldn't inherit it. But over the months, as the project developed, my motivation had shifted. This wasn't about punishing Thomas anymore. It was about preserving something valuable, something that might otherwise have been lost. "Have you heard from Ethan recently?" Patricia asked, intuiting the direction of my thoughts. "Yes, actually. He's coming tomorrow to see the museum before the public opening. His history project on the Winslows earned him an A, and apparently, his teacher suggested he visit once it was open." "And Thomas?" I shook my head. "No, not directly. Helen mentioned that he knows about the museum. Of course, everyone in Portland seems to know about it. The Historical Society had done an excellent job promoting the new attraction with articles in the local paper and features on regional news programs, but he hasn't reached out." Patricia squeezed my arm sympathetically. "Give it time. Some wounds take longer to heal. Some never do," I replied, thinking of the 6 months of silence from my son. We'd seen each other only once since our fateful lunch at Ethan's championship baseball game, where we'd exchanged stiff nods from a distance. Lauren hadn't even looked in my direction. "Miss Winslow," Sarah approached, tablet in hand. "Sorry to interrupt, but we've just received a special delivery. It's in the side parlor." Curious, I excused myself and followed Sarah through the house to the smaller sitting room that now featured an exhibition on women in Portland's history, including several items that had belonged to my grandmother and mother. In the center of the room stood a large rectangular object covered with a cloth. "It arrived about 20 minutes ago," Sarah explained. "The delivery person said it was to be unveiled during today's event, but only when you were present." "How mysterious," I said, intrigued. "Did they say who sent it?" "No, just that it's a donation for the museum." Sarah handed me a card that had accompanied the delivery. This was with it. The envelope simply said Margaret in handwriting I didn't recognize. Inside was a note. "Every museum needs art that tells its story." I couldn't think of anyone with those initials who might send such a gift. Puzzled, I stepped forward and carefully lifted the cloth. Beneath it was a painting, a large, beautifully executed portrait of Portland Harbor, as it might have looked in the 1880s. In the foreground was a ship with CWSC painted on its hull, the Charles Winslow Shipping Company. The level of historical detail was impressive, the skyline accurate to the period, the maritime activities meticulously researched, even the flags and signals on the vessels correct for that era. But what truly caught my attention was the signature in the lower right corner. "Ethan Winslow Ellis." My hand flew to my mouth. Ethan had painted this and signed it with Winslow. "It's extraordinary," Sarah breathed, examining the artwork. "The historical accuracy alone is remarkable, but the technique." "May I ask who EW is?" "My grandson," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "Ethan, your grandson, painted this. It's museum quality." I had no idea he was so talented, I admitted. Ethan had always been creative, but this level of artistry was unexpected. And when had he found time to create such a detailed work? It must have taken months. "Would you like a moment alone?" Sarah asked, noting my emotional reaction. I nodded gratefully. After she left, I sat on a nearby bench, studying the painting through tears that threatened to spill over. The care Ethan had taken with every detail, the obvious research he'd done into both the historical period and the Winslow shipping business, the hours of work the piece represented, it was overwhelming. And that signature, Ethan Winslow Ellis. He had claimed the Winslow name as part of his own identity. My phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Ethan. "Did it arrive? Do you like it?" I quickly typed back. "It's magnificent."
I'm speechless. When did you learn to paint like this?
Been taking lessons for 2 years. This is my first big project. Wanted it to be special. It's beyond special. It's extraordinary. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. Can't wait to see it in the museum tomorrow. Can I bring a friend? Of course. Anyone you like. There was a pause before his next message appeared. Actually, Dad wants to come too. Is that okay? I stared at the screen, my heart suddenly racing. Thomas wanted to come to the museum after 6 months of silence. Before I could reply, Ethan sent another text. He saw me working on the painting and asked a lot of questions about the Winslows. I think he feels bad about everything. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. Of course, he can come. You're both welcome anytime.
Great. See you tomorrow at 10.
I'll be here. I slipped the phone back into my pocket, my mind spinning. Thomas wanted to see the museum. Was it merely curiosity? A gesture of support for Ethan's artwork? Or something more? An olive branch, perhaps? I wasn't sure how to feel. The hurt was still there. The words, "You're not part of my life," still echoed painfully when I allowed myself to remember. But there was something else, too. A tiny spark of hope that perhaps through Ethan and through this shared history, some kind of reconciliation might be possible. Not today, perhaps not tomorrow, but someday. The next morning, I was uncharacteristically nervous as I prepared for Ethan and Thomas's visit. I changed my outfit twice, fussed with my hair, and checked and rechecked that everything in the museum was perfectly arranged. Sarah noticed my agitation but kindly said nothing, busying herself with last-minute adjustments to displays. At precisely 10 o'clock, the doorbell rang. Sarah went to answer it while I remained in the main parlor, my hands clasped tightly in front of me. Ethan entered first, his face lighting up when he saw me. "Grandma." He crossed the room quickly, enveloping me in a hug that reminded me how much he'd grown in the past 6 months. At nearly 16, he was now taller than I was. "The museum looks amazing," he said, stepping back to take in the room. "Even better than I imagined when you first told me about it." "Thank you, Ethan. It wouldn't be complete without your painting. It's the perfect centerpiece for the maritime exhibition." He beamed with pride, then glanced over his shoulder. "Dad's here, too." Thomas stood in the doorway, looking uncomfortable but determined. He'd aged in the past 6 months, more gray at his temples, new lines around his eyes. Or perhaps I was just seeing him more clearly now, without the filter of maternal devotion that had always softened my perception of him. "Hello, Mother," he said formally. "Thomas," I nodded, keeping my voice neutral. "Thank you for coming. Ethan wanted me to see his painting." He paused, then added, "And the museum, it's impressive what you've done here." It wasn't much as olive branches go, but it was something. "Thank you." Sarah Chun, our curator, deserves most of the credit. "Sarah, this is my son, Thomas Ellis, and my grandson, Ethan." Sarah stepped forward to shake their hands, then offered, "Would you like a tour? I can show you our main exhibitions." "Actually," Ethan interjected, "I was hoping Grandma could show us around, especially the shipping company stuff since that's what I painted." "Of course," I agreed. "Let's start with the maritime room, then." As we moved through the house, I explained the various displays, sharing stories about the Winslow family that I discovered during my research. Ethan asked thoughtful questions, clearly building on what he'd learned for his school project. Thomas remained largely silent, but I could feel his attention, his gaze moving from artifacts to photographs to informational panels. In the room featuring Ethan's painting, Thomas finally spoke up. "This is extraordinary, Ethan. I had no idea you were so talented." Ethan shrugged, though I could see he was pleased by the praise. "I've been interested in art for a while. Mrs. Abernathy, my art teacher, says I have a good eye for historical detail." "You certainly do," I agreed. "The research you must have done to get everything so accurate." "I had help," Ethan admitted. "The Maritime Museum let me look at their old photographs and ship designs, and that book you gave me about great-grandfather's shipping routes was really useful." "Charles Winslow," Thomas said thoughtfully. "I don't remember you talking much about your side of the family when I was growing up." "I didn't," I acknowledged. "After I married your father, we were very focused on the Ellis family, the Ellis business, the Ellis traditions." The Winslows faded into the background. I touched a glass case containing Charles's business ledgers. "I regret that now. There was so much history I could have shared with you." Thomas nodded, a flicker of something, understanding, regret, crossing his face. Dad always was dominant in establishing our family identity. It was the closest he'd come to acknowledging why I might have reclaimed my maiden name, created this museum, and established the Winslow legacy separate from the Ellis name. "Your father was a wonderful man," I said carefully. But yes, the Ellis identity was very important to him and to you, I think. Thomas didn't respond directly. Instead, he moved to examine a photograph of my father in his professor's robes. Ethan tells me your father was an important historian. Yes, Professor James Winslow. He taught Maine history at Bowdoin for 40 years. Many of his books are still used in university courses. Another legacy I knew nothing about, Thomas murmured almost to himself. Ethan, sensing the tension, suggested, "Can we see your apartment upstairs, Grandma?" "Dad, Grandma lives on the third floor now. You're still living here?" Thomas seemed surprised. "Yes, part of my arrangement with the Historical Society. I have lifetime residence rights to the third floor, which has been converted into a private apartment." I hesitated, then added, "Would you like to see it?" Thomas nodded, and we made our way up the grand staircase to the third floor. Unlike the museum spaces below, my apartment was modern and comfortable, though I'd kept several antique pieces that held special meaning. Through the large windows, Casco Bay was visible in the distance, sparkling in the morning sun. "It's nice," Thomas said, looking around. "Smaller than before, but still home," I finished. I didn't want to leave entirely. This house has too many memories. "Yes." Thomas moved to the window, his back to me. "Ethan, would you give your grandmother and me a moment?" Ethan glanced between us, concern evident on his face. "Sure, I'll go check out more of the museum." He squeezed my hand quickly before heading downstairs. Silence filled the room after he left. I waited, giving Thomas space to say whatever he had come to say. Finally, he turned from the window. "I owe you an apology." The words hung in the air between us. "What I said to you that day at lunch." He shook his head. "It was cruel and untrue.
You've always been part of my life.
Even when I tried to push you away." I remained silent, not trusting myself to speak. "Seeing what you've done here, preserving this history, creating this legacy, it made me realize what I was rejecting." He gestured around him. "Not just you, but all of this. The Winslow heritage, that's as much a part of Ethan as the Ellis name." "It is," I agreed quietly. "Just as it's part of you, whether you acknowledge it or not." Thomas nodded slowly. "I've been thinking about that, about names and what they mean." He met my eyes directly. "Lauren and I are having problems." The admission surprised me. "I'm sorry to hear that. Are you?" His tone wasn't accusatory, merely questioning. "Yes," I said honestly. "I never wanted your marriage to fail, Thomas. I just wanted a place in your life, in Ethan's life. I know that now." He sighed heavily. "Lauren and I, we want different things. Have for a while. I think my focus on the Ellis name, the Ellis legacy, it came from me, not her. I pushed for it because I thought it's what Dad would have wanted. But in doing so, I pushed away the person who helped create that legacy." I moved to stand beside him at the window. "Your father would have wanted you to be happy, Thomas. That's all. The name, the legacy, those were important to him. Yes, but not as important as family." "Yet I rejected family in favor of the name," Thomas said bitterly. "The irony isn't lost on me." We stood in silence for a moment, watching a ship make its way across the bay. "I can't change the past 6 months," Thomas finally said. "But I'd like to try to rebuild our relationship if you're willing." "I miss you, Mom." The simple admission, "I miss you," and the return to Mom, instead of the formal mother he'd used earlier, broke something open inside me. Tears I'd been holding back spilled freely now. "I've missed you, too," I whispered. "So much." Thomas hesitated, then put his arm around my shoulders, tentatively at first, then more securely when I didn't pull away. We stood that way for several minutes, not speaking, just beginning the long process of healing. Finally, I wiped my eyes and stepped back. "We should go find Ethan. He'll be worried." "He's a remarkable young man," Thomas said as we moved toward the stairs. "His interest in the Winslow history, that's genuine. It's not just to please you." "I know. And his talent, that painting is truly extraordinary. He wants to explore more of the Winslow side of his heritage." Thomas continued. "I've been thinking perhaps he could sign his future works as Ethan Winslow Ellis." Officially, I mean. I stopped on the landing, looking at my son with surprise. You wouldn't mind? Thomas shook his head. I think it's right. The Winslow legacy is as much a part of him as the Ellis name. I understand that now. He paused. And maybe there's room for both legacies in all our lives. It wasn't a full reconciliation. There were still conversations to be had, boundaries to be reestablished, trust to be rebuilt. But as we descended the stairs together to find Ethan examining a display about my mother's library work, I felt a profound sense of peace. Thomas had the Ellis name, yes, but the legacy, the true legacy of family, of history, of connection, that was something we could share, something we could rebuild together. And perhaps someday, when the time was right, I would tell him about the small adjustment I'd made to my will after his visit. The trust for Thomas now included not just Robert's personal items, but a meaningful portion of the family assets as well, because in the end, it wasn't about the name at all. It was about the love that had created the legacy in the first place. A love that, despite everything, had never truly disappeared. If you enjoyed my story of reclaiming my identity after heartbreak, please subscribe to hear more authentic tales of women finding their strength later in life. Leave a comment sharing what the Winslow legacy means to you. I read every single one.